Hey, good evening, everyone. My name's Mark, and on behalf of Book Soup, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event with Tiffanie Drayton in conversation with Stephanie Land, discussing Tiffany's new book, Black American Refugee, Escaping the Narcissism of the American Dream. So for updates on our upcoming events, please feel free to subscribe to our email newsletter. We also have our first in-person store events coming soon. Proof of vax and masks are required, but you can get your tickets on our website. And as for tonight, this evening's virtual event is going to end with a Q&A. So to submit a question, please use the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. I see we already have 2 in there right now. If there's a question on the list you'd like for our speakers to answer, just click the like button and we'll try to answer as many questions as time will allow. Also, consider supporting our bookstore and the author's work by purchasing a copy of today's featured book, Black American Refugee. Just click on the green purchase button directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website, and you can continue your checkout process there, and you will not be interrupted from the broadcast. So, a couple words about our featured guest. Stephanie Land is an American author and public speaker. She is best known for writing Made, Hard Work, Low Pay, and a Mother's Will to Survive, which was adapted to the television miniseries Made for Netflix. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, NYR Daily, Vox, Cosmopolitan, the Huffington Post, and the Atlantic. Tiffanie Drayton is a mother, world traveler, and journalist whose work has been featured in the New York Times, Vox, Marie Claire, Playboy, Salon, Complex, Yahoo, among other outlets. She is the author of Black American Refugee, Escaping the Narcissism of the American Dream, and has published 2 nonfiction young adult books, Developing Political Leadership Skills and Coping with Gun Violence. She grew up in the United States and currently lives with her family in Tobago. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the camera over to these 2. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation, everyone.
Hey, everybody. Bienvenido.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Tiffanie, for inviting me. It's quite an honor, and I have probably stressed about this a little bit too much, but I feel better being overprepared. So
never trust you, darling. I have you. I will catch you.
I guess first I wanted to ask, like, how are you doing? I mean, just with the book publishing thing and where you're at now, and doing a bunch of virtual events, and how has it been so far?
I feel like I don't know. I guess I feel like I was made for this. No pun intended. Made. Anyway, that was terrible. No, but for real, it's just been such a awesome experience. Working with my editor on this book was probably one of the best writing/editing relationships I've ever had in my life. It was just like a marriage made in heaven. And then getting to this point and watching the book finally be out there in the world and get to have these amazing conversations with authors like you, people who otherwise I would have just never even dreamed of just having these phenomenal relationships and conversations with. It's just, I'm in a really good place in terms of my career. I just need my personal life to catch up to that. And it's boom, perfect.
I know. Wouldn't we all like that to happen?
And the war, and then it's like, Tiffany's book is out, and then the war ends, and then there's no world hunger, and then everything is magically perfect. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll just get right to it. I obviously loved your book. I was showing Tiffanie. I have so many. I am a dog ear reader. I'm sorry, but yeah, I dog ear and underline and do all of that. So, but I noticed that a lot of the themes in your book were very similar to the themes that were in my book. And in just realizing that the American dream is a myth. And I end up talking about that so much all over the country, of just kind of schooling people on how ridiculous it is that we think that is possible for everybody in America, when it's just not. And and you go through that so beautifully and compare it to a violent relationship with a narcissist that even, you know, as I was reading it, it made so much more sense to me. And I am currently working on a book about higher education and how that's very inaccessible for low-income people, and especially low-income people of color. And so I asked your forgiveness going into this, like, that's going to be like, that's most of the things that I've underlined of just and so I assume that everybody has already purchased the book in this chat and has read it.
I would hope. If you haven't, right there, click the button, purchase the book.
Yeah, there's a button right there. Because I am obviously going to give some spoilers. But the one thing that really hit me was on page 198. It was in the gaslighting chapter. And you said, I began to regret my decision to go to college. What was the point of all of my hard work? And so I know that you were at that place when you were writing it and when you lived it, but do you still feel that way?
You know, it's like it's a really weird situation because college was this amazing opportunity for me in terms of my emotional growth, my mental growth, and then of course, like intellectually, my exposure to certain teachers like Susan Shapiro, my amazing writing teacher in Hamilton. These professors and those studies were so crucial for me, but simultaneously, I took so many classes, and each class was $1,200 per credit.
Yeah.
Oh man, you're frozen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Am I frozen to you? Oh no.
Oh, no, you're right now. Right. So each class was $1,200 per credit, right? And by the time the bill came, it's like every single semester, I was like, I can't pay this semester. I can't pay this the next semester. And like a miracle would happen and some scholarship or something would cover it. But by the end of my schooling, I literally could not pay for the degree. And I was like, well, what was the point if I can't even get the stupid piece of paper saying that I did all of this work? How can I prove to the world that I'm worthy of saying that I completed a college education without even having the damn degree? So it was just very upsetting at the time that despite all of this, firstly, it's like a spit in the face, not only to myself, but also to my professors, also to those people that spent all of those hours educating me and like getting me prepared for the working world. So it's like, I still stand by that position entirely because we have to get to the point where people are not working in vain for those diplomas and they can access their diplomas. I mean, how else are you even going to get a job and pay back the loans, right? So I still entirely feel that way about it. It's like, what's the point if you can't even get the degree?
Yeah. And you also say, I was finding that a Black woman's social circumstance may very well be worsened by a higher education. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, you go on to explain that, but I mean, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, because it's a really sad situation when you have things like mass incarceration, right? Because people view mass incarceration like only in a box, like, okay, there are a bunch of men who are going to prison or being incarcerated, Black men, right, at an alarming rate. But they don't connect that to the fact that every single young Black man that goes to jail is another partner that a young Black woman cannot have. That's out of the dating market or out of the dating pool. So it's like the more for a Black woman, you elevate your circumstances, whether it be educationally or getting a great job, you start looking around and you're like, but wait a minute, if I'm heterosexual, like who am I supposed to pair up with? And so that was one of those conundrums that I ran into immediately. And then that aside from just dating and trying to find love or trying to establish your relationship, then came just the problem of debt, because Black women hold the most student loan debt in the United States of America. And I found myself in that pool and a part of that statistic. And it was just so exhausting, just so saddening.
I think it's really interesting that that you went back. I mean, in the beginning, you know, you were love bombed by America and you talked about like how great America was. And you have this experience in Texas that is pretty horrible. and you're bullied and you fight, and then you finally like find yourself in this really good school district in Florida. But even on your first day, you say like it created distinct and separate paths for students within a single school and in school systems, and divided children early, setting them off on trajectories they'd likely have trouble transcending or breaking out of. And I wondered if you saw that in the time that you were living it.
Oh, absolutely. And it was so clear to me what was happening that I would literally go home and ask my brother, like, you the only Black person in all your classes? And he'd be like, yep. And I'd be like, oh, Lord. And it was like a family dinner discussion, because as we do with most things, my family and I would sit around and like discuss it. And that was really great in that it helped me to A, come to terms with, and B, be grounded in reality about what I was facing, right? So I didn't have to think, okay, this is just me experiencing this. All of a sudden I knew, per my brother's experiences, and even some of my other friends, like, why is it that some of my closest friends are ending up in remedial classes? It's like, I never thought I had friends that were dumb or any less capable than I was, but yet they're in remedial classes or regular classes, and I'm in this honors or AP class. So it was so clear to me at that point that I was being treated differently based on like these arbitrary criteria that still to this day I can't exactly pinpoint. I really can't.
Yeah, it's hard to. I mean, it's for me, it just all comes down to racism, really. I mean, and you talk about that so well throughout the whole entire book. And it's not only racism and how African American people arrived in this country, and how they were, you used the word discarded at one point, and then how that, I mean, affected your life in a very major way in living in America, and it was ultimately why you left. But I wanted to ask you about this. There's a scene where you're being gentrified out of your neighborhood in Florida, and you are going to have to move across the highway to a worse neighborhood and a worse school district. And you see that happening as a high schooler, and there's this, as a mother who like really fought for my kids to have a good education, like this just line was just like, no, Mom, please. I begged in a whisper, and I fell to my knees, pressing my hands together, praying to her as if she were God. And I just wondered, I know that your mom has been incredibly involved in your life. It still is, lives with you and in Trinidad and Tobago, and just, so I kind of wondered like what it was like for you as a writer to not only write about that, but also to live it, and then also to write about it as a mother now.
I feel like I was really fortunate in that my mother always believed me. And that to me was so crucial and powerful in how I was able to emotionally process a lot of the things that happened to me. Because when it came time for her to say, okay, well, we're just going to move across the street. What's the big deal? It's right across the street. Can a parent truly envision that a move right across the highway? I mean, it's just 4 streets, 4 lanes of highway. That's it. How can you truly envision that such a small move could so drastically alter the opportunities your child has? And even if you do think, well, maybe you'll lose out on playing on the best sports team, but you'll still get a decent education. Or maybe, you could still find a way to rationalize it as a parent. But at that time, I'd had so many experiences in bad schools and crappy neighborhoods, many of which I had kind of kept hidden from her up until that point. So that point was really me revealing my truth to her in a way that in the past I would have kept it to myself, because I was really trying to protect her. I knew how hard she worked. I knew how it's like no matter how much she moved, we just kept getting moved again. And I always wanted to protect her. But in that moment, it was like I literally felt like I was like pleading for my life. I like literally, it's like, please God, I can't anymore. And for my mom, on my mom's side, like hearing that from me, because I was always the kind of person that, you know, is always happy and always happy go lucky, and always like taking care of everything and always that A student. And, you know, so to see me in that state, it was just this moment of like, oh shit, like this is bad. And for her to have the courage and the strength to say, look, listen, I'm not going to leave my kids in a situation that's bad. Let's put all the stuff on the wagon, kids. You know, my mom jumped back on the wagon and literally packed ourselves up and was like, no, we're out of here. We're not doing that. And to me, it's like having that really orients me in how I want to parent my children. Because I tell everybody, like, believe your kids, believe your kids, believe your kids. It's just one of those really fundamental things for me, because I was believed. And as a result, I've had a good schooling experience that I also didn't have to compromise my emotional well-being or my psychological well-being in ways that other kids might have had to, because their parents didn't believe them.
And so how much do you think that that time period at that school where you're like playing tennis and doing the community service at a club or, you know, whatever. I mean, like, how did that affect, because I know that you went back to New Jersey and then suddenly you had this moment in high school where you graduated and you had this just like total malaise. And you even said, like, what was there left to aspire to in a country where whiteness was the pinnacle of success? And so I wondered if you could talk about that, of just feeling like you were the star student in the class to realizing that you were put back into the system, and now what is expected of you and how are you going to overcome that? It's a lot to put on a teenager. It's a lot to put on anybody, but I kind of wondered how it was for you to go through so many varying levels of education.
Yeah, you know, on one end, it really taught me what it should look like, right? Once you have good housing, you know what good housing is. Once you go to a good school, you know what going to a good school is like. So it created that immediate juxtaposition for me as a young person. I was like, this is a bad school, period. So it was impossible to gaslight me into thinking differently, and it was impossible to get me to to accept that as good enough for me. It was impossible. But despite my realization that this wasn't something that was good enough for me and it shouldn't be good enough for anybody, the environment that was so normalized in the environment that nothing I said could have changed that. And so that's where the malaise that you kind of spoke about came in. And it was just like, I'm not doing this. I'm not going there. I'm not doing that. I'm not waking up from bed, you know, and it's just like a slow crash and burn effect where the first thing is like, I don't want to go to that class anymore because that teacher doesn't care about her students, or she repeatedly says racist things to put them down, or she even walks into class and just reads off the answers to the test the next day because she doesn't want to have to teach. And all of these things would literally upset me. And I would go to the guidance counselors and I would go to the principals and be arguing about it and pissed off every day. And then eventually I was like, I'm just not going to go anymore. And I'm just not going to participate anymore. And then it was just like, I'm just not going to get out of bed today. And then it was just like, I'm not going to do anything at all. But fortunately, and this is one of the things I really try to stress to people, at every juncture of my life where it felt like things had entirely fallen apart, where I lost all desire to get up or keep moving or keep fighting, there was always that one person, just one, that would step in and say, look, listen, girl, I know what you're seeing. Yes, you're right. But here you go. Here's a path. And they would just light a path for me. And for me, that's been guidance counselors, one here or there, or even friends, even just really close friends. And so I always like tell people, like, be that one person for someone else, for as many people as you can. And in these times, especially, like, just be that one person, because so many people, and especially young people, are just struggling. And I mean, I struggle to get out of bed. Like, everybody's seeing the news every day. It's not easy. So it's like, still, I even when I don't have the capacity for myself, I still try to put myself out there to help people with their writing, or to give people like words of like a little bit of direction, because it was so crucial for me. The story could have ended there easy. It could have been like, and then Tiffanie got into bed and never got out, you know?
And I will say, I know Tiffanie because she's in a writing group that we have. We're called the Sulky Bitches writing group. and you definitely do that. You are such a bright shining light in the Sulky Bitches world.
I try.
So I thought about like if maybe you could read a section of your book or a few paragraphs or something. Since it is the first day of Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago, I thought you could read. It's on page 142 for me, where you enter this huge place where there's all these people dancing, and yeah, just go on.
Yeah, well, first I want to set up the scene because we kind of talked about it before, why it kind of stuck out to you, because this scene comes after I had been stealing my sister's ID to go party in New York City, typically at upscale nightclubs. And, you know, being a Black woman, it's like I would enter into these clubs and I really wanted to shake my booty. I wanted to dance. I wanted to feel free. But I always got this sense of like, people are watching you and you shouldn't behave like that, or you shouldn't be doing that. And that's where the scene comes in. Okay, so here we are. This is in Trinidad and Tobago now. We arrived at a pier on the western side of the island, where the party called Insomnia was set to take place. The area was buzzing with life, thousands of people on the street, scattered among various venues, and food vendors sprinkled in between them. Barely any police in sight. It was 2 a.m. and my eyes were already growing heavy with sleep. Bottles of alcohol in hand, I wondered if security would stop us and tell us to throw them out. Those thoughts were compounded by my fear that someone there would itemize my flaws and refuse me access to the party. But we just walked by after presenting our tickets. I learned that this was a cooler fete, so whatever the heck you can fit in a cooler or in your two hands was good to go, and no one was expected to show up glamorous. We entered into a huge arena with a stage set up, lights flashing everywhere, and girls handing out green bandanas and glow sticks. The bass of the music reverberated into the open air. My cousin motioned for us to follow him, and together we made our way through to the front of the stage, plopped our cooler down, and started to have a few drinks. Within moments, local artists made their way to the stage and the crowd started to move to the music. Men and women alike rolling their waists to the beat of soca music. All shades and colors, but mostly Black and brown, all body shapes and sizes. Soon the music began to take hold of me too, and I can feel myself losing control. My body swayed left to right, my hips shook. Nobody was watching. No one was judging.
Oh, that's so good. So, I mean, my thoughts with that were, it's almost like your experience in the school in Florida. I mean, how do you come back from that?
Right. You don't. You don't.
And so I feel like the rest of your book is about that, of just like, but I experienced this thing and I know it's possible. And I know that I can feel this way, but I don't here. And it's just a fighting to get back. And, you know, you mentioned the caste system in the US and then you also talk about, there was a thing that I underlined where there would be no white gaze to diminish or commodify my self-expression. And it was when you were back in the States after that experience and having lunch with your boyfriend, then boyfriend, and suddenly felt, you use the word deflated. And so how was that? I mean, you talk about it in the book a lot, but like, how was that for you?
It's like, you know, going to Trinidad was literally like, you're like a balloon, and all of the beautiful experiences you have, like all of the beautiful people that are seeing you every day, they're all brown, they're all Black too, and they're like morning and greeting you. And then you go out and you party and you dance, everybody's partying and dancing, shaking their booty, and it's like, oh my God. And it's like, you're just growing and you're just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're just picking up even more space. Like you go outside and you talk loudly, you know, and then coming back to the United States of America, I felt huge. And then as soon as I walked up to my ex, you know, he was a white guy. And he notices I'm different. And he's like, you're different. And I'm like, yeah, I guess. I hadn't even fully processed what had happened to me. But starting at that exact moment, that was the beginning of like the air just coming out like, Because moving from there, it's like, okay, you go to a restaurant and now it's like, shh, you're talking too loud. Oh, it's like, we go back out to the usual clubs and it's like, no, you can't dance like that. No, they're not going to play that kind of music. No, they can't, so you slowly just feel yourself kind of sinking down into your existence. And that's pretty much what I just didn't want to do anymore. Like, that's why I left. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I like that big feeling. I like, especially because, I have a huge personality. So I like to be free to express myself. And yeah, so it felt horrible, to say the very least, to try to reconfigure myself again and squeeze myself back into that little tiny box.
And you talked a lot about your cousin who was living in a very, very white world and like told you things like Black people don't go ice skating. And you were just like, why go ice skating? Like, I don't understand why you're thinking that. And so I guess throughout the book, I kind of wondered why you didn't conform to that way of thinking.
Right. Because I fortunately and interestingly, you see, when my family story first began, like when we first arrived to America, it's like these entirely different trajectories that my mother and her sister took. My sister took the route of aspiring to whiteness in every possible way, moving to a white neighborhood, making sure she drives a brand new car every day, just living that ultimate American dream. The two kids in the house with the picket fence, and when you walk inside, you have to take off your shoes in the front, and you can't talk too loud because the neighbors will hear. Like, all of the policing and the constantness of fitting into Americanization and whiteness. But it's like, with my mother, we lived in a super Hispanic town at first, like with merengue and bachata and all of these things. It was always so fun and so lively, and I loved it. I just love Hispanic culture, and so all of these things were incorporated into my identity. Aside from being an immigrant and aside from being a Black woman, I was like a multicultural person, and so the idea of trying to fit into whiteness was just like really alien to me. Actually, I was like, white people don't do that. You think this is what white people think. And I didn't have that socialization. I wasn't socialized in a white environment for them to dictate to me what I can or can't do. In fact, it was so alien to me that when I started encountering it as I got older, like, oh, Black people don't swim, or, Black people don't do this. I was like, but I just came from a country and everybody's Black and everybody swims. So it's just like, how do I reconcile these two things? You have to be entirely ignorant, I would say, and you have to not experience any other culture to have these beliefs. And I was fortunate that I wasn't raised like that, whereas my cousin was, because of that path that her mother took.
And it really seemed like you drew a lot of self-affirmation and power in your moments where you were in the water or near the water. Like Hawaii, where you're surfing, and then like when you travel with your boyfriend and you just have all these like experiences that I mean, most people don't associate Black people doing. And so I thought that was really powerful for you to write about, just like how you're like backpacking through Hawaii and experiencing all these things. And how much do you miss those moments?
I don't really, because it's a constant for me, like that desire for travel and that desire for adventure, and that, like, I don't miss it because it's just who I am. Like, I live that every day. Even as I struggle to deal with motherhood and an overly dramatic ex that wants to make everything as difficult as possible, I still always find a moment to find that adventure. And being in Trinidad, especially for me, just waking up in the morning to the sound of the birds and just going to sleep to the sound of the crickets. It's like really the little things that reinforce that beauty and nature and the water. I swim all the time. I love the ocean. I'm by the beach as much as possible because these are the places that make me feel alive. Like, I'm alive in the water, and there's water everywhere. So it doesn't matter. It'll never end, but I love those moments. And as I said, like, they taught me so much about what I was capable of, and as you were saying, whether or not you're told explicitly, Black people don't do this or Black people don't do that, you also don't see that they do. So it's a weird, even a woman, like I remember when I first started traveling, one of the big things people would say to me is, aren't you scared? Aren't you scared that you're going to get hurt or that you're going to get this? I was like, more women die in intimate partner relationships than they die hitchhiking through Hawaii, actually, and I'm like such a nerd that I would go on and on about statistics and domestic violence. And they'd be like, what's wrong with this woman? But it's true. It's true. Nobody sits to consider that one of the most dangerous parts of being a woman is being at home. One of the most dangerous parts of being a Black person is being at home in your community. And that's a sad reality. So it's like one of the first pieces that I ever wrote was literally about that. Like, I am safer hitchhiking in Hawaii and backpacking through Asia than I am in my own Black community in the United States of America. What says that about the United States of America and the lives that Black people are forced to endure under systemic racism?
Yeah. And no, you're fine. I was thinking about how to like leeway into my next question.
Yeah.
But okay, so my next question was about when you're at the new school and you have this professor and you take Professor Hamilton is what you say, and you take a class and you suddenly learn about systemic racism. And it's something that I can identify with in a very different way. Just learning about systemic poverty and how the systems keep people, in their place, basically. But you spelled it out so beautifully. You said over centuries that system created for economic gain corrupted the entire social fabric of the country. And then you mentioned, the culture, language, schools, redlining, wealth gap. But then you said, in coming to that realization, I was relieved of so much guilt. And I kind of wondered if you could expand on what that guilt actually was.
Absolutely. And, it really goes back to the idea of, systemic abuse being no different to being in an abusive relationship, because the tools that an abuser uses to control their victims, it's very similar. And one of those big tools is controlling the narrative and always making the victim responsible for the abuse. So it's like, we're told, if you don't get something, it's because you didn't work hard enough. Or if you don't get the outcome that you want, it's because if you didn't get that perfect job, it's because you didn't put in enough job applications. We're always burdened by that abuser's tool of blaming us for the circumstances that are actually created by the system. And that's something that I had no idea of when I walked into that class. And, the infamous quote of "niggas are lazy," which is something that I also had internalized and somehow found a way to regurgitate to this poor, excruciatingly intellectual, well-informed Black man who was trying to educate us about racism, right? What a perfect, a Black woman is saying something like that. So it really goes to show how deeply internalized these messages are, and how very damning it is. So I would have never, and that's something that I really try to reinforce with people too. People think that you need to come into the conversation knowing everything. Nobody knows everything, because systems are clandestine and abuse is clandestine. In order to understand abuse, you go to a therapist and you sit down and they say, "Excuse me, that sounds like you're in an abusive relationship." And at first you're like, "Are you sure? Are you sure? It's not because I didn't wash the dish the way that he said I should have washed the dish." It's like, "No, sweetie, it's because that's an abuser." And so seeing that parallel between having to identify abusive dynamics in my personal life and also just systemic racism and how it employs so much victim blaming and shaming, now having clear evidence, no, you didn't do anything wrong. You worked hard. You did everything right. The system is what's messed up. All of a sudden, I was just alleviated of so much burden. And not only that, but it was like, now there was a clear wrongdoer. So my angst and my anger and my sadness could be directed in the right direction instead of internalizing it and letting it eat away at me.
And you spelled that out as far as poverty is configured into your life too. I mean, there was a thing that I underlined the shit out of, after you said you felt deflated, sorry to cuss.
Do you have to be sorry? We all grown. Yeah, we all grown.
But you said the sight of a negative bank balance when you are hungry between classes or in need of a bus fare to get home after work late at night can trigger a whole cascade of negative thoughts and feelings of self-disgust. And I still struggle with that. And, you know, I have reached a level of success that, you know, I didn't even imagine I would anyway. And so I just kind of wondered if that is unfortunately part of your narrative even now.
It never really ends, because the truth is the system of capitalism and money is so tied to your well-being that it's now at this point inescapable. It's not like a relationship with an ex that you can just say, okay, I'm done with you, right? It's much more entrenched in your daily life. So safeguarding yourself spiritually, psychologically, and even being able to recognize when you are triggered by poverty, or even just coming close to not being able to pay for something, like these things trigger so much self-blame and negativity in oneself. And it's because you can't control your circumstances, and who wants to feel helpless? No one. But for me, I've learned, whether or not, and this is from years of being broke anyways, I've learned to not blame myself, because how much more can I do? You know, there's not much more I can do. And just being alleviated of that self-blame does so much for my psyche and does so much for my mental health. And I know I would be far worse off if I did not know that there was a larger system at play. So just that little piece of information at least gives me a little tiny bit of reprieve in my mind, where I'm not shaming myself, where I'm at least just angry at the system, like, oh, God damn it, no matter what I do, and I can direct that energy and become a part of organizations that are advocating for like to cancel student loan debt. You know, like now all of a sudden we can actually organize around our anger and direct our anger in the right place instead of self-blame. So that's what I tell everybody. I'm like, you're angry at that bank balance, you're angry at that loan, that student loan, you're angry at the family court charging your family tens of thousands of dollars and literally taking money out of your children's mouths. Guess what? There's a place to direct that energy, and it's right at the system that's failing.
Do you ever get tired from that? I mean, I just wonder, I mean, your whole book is about fighting, and your whole book is about, you know, fighting for yourself, fighting for your family, mostly fighting for yourself, and then, you know, fighting for your children. I think there's a lot of power in advocacy. And I think I'm probably projecting a little bit here.
No. This is a great question. And I actually do have an answer. Where am I at right now? Girl, I'm in DR. Where was I yesterday? I was on the beach. You know, everybody has limits, and trust and believe I have my limits. And when I reach my threshold, that's how I ended up in Hawaii, swimming naked on the beach, because I was so tired of being a broke college kid. I was so tired of not being able to find a job, and I had to work within my little $900 a month frisky payments. And I was like, okay, I have two choices. I'm going to wallow in self-pity and sit here in my mother's house and let her complain that I'm not doing anything with my life, or I'm going to go live in a tent by the beach and see some dolphins. So yes, of course you get exhausted, and that exhaustion propels me to find a way to reinvigorate myself and repurpose it, and like go on an adventure, and one that is within my means, and just do whatever I can do to recharge and regenerate. Like if you're in the same, leave your house for sure. Leave your house, go to anything. You have to get tired. If you don't get tired, you're not human. I definitely get exhausted, but I know once I start getting that creepy, sinky feeling, like, I'm slowly dying, like I know I have to exit the situation and recharge.
I think that was actually my next question. When you're talking about like Patricia Arquette and like all of these feminist people who are like fighting for people of color and women of color, and you you directly say they pointed to class and not race as the problem. And then as a woman of color, I was frequently out of breath from offering constant explanations that fell on deaf ears. And I wondered how you feel about that as you're on book tour and as you're talking about this all the time, and how you have been living it, and how that, if there's been any progression there, or if there hasn't been, or just how you're doing, really.
You know, it's sad to say that it's relieving to meet society in this moment, because for how many years can you say systemic racism has destroyed my life, and people be like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. Obama's president. And you'll be like, okay, I hear that argument. Let me go back and I'll return with statistics, with studies, with history, and then you put that on the table, and it's like, firstly, they don't even read it. They don't even care. They don't even care to indulge it. And that's when you realize, just the level of intellectual dishonesty, I've actually just exhausted myself for no reason. And it's very sad to say that it took white America watching, thank God to technology, which forced accountability through recording the police. It took white Americans having to experience it. And that's precisely what 2020 was. And even prior to that, Trayvon Martin, to some extent, because it's well, he's a child, he only has Skittles. But with George Floyd, white Americans were forced to visually see what Black people have been explaining for so long. And that forced reckoning has been one of the most relieving things for me, because it's true, the ears are still deaf, but far less deaf. Now there is some realization that, okay, what you're saying is true. There is a lot of affirmation even. And I would like to push it a step further and say, well, okay, if what I'm saying is true, how are you actually invested in educating yourself and in educating the population and educating children, right? To reality, so that they will be less burdened, as I was relieved of burden in my 20s. Maybe we could relieve kids of that burden earlier, so that they understand racism couldn't actually harm them, and how do we protect them? The how do we's and the questions go on and on and on. And that's why we've come to this moment of allies being everything. Now we are all seeing clearly what the issues are, whether it be issues for women, whether it be issues for trans kids and their rights being attacked in Texas. It's so glaring and clear that we have to be a united force now. And that's one of the beauties of this moment. We are getting there, certainly. We are uniting on so many issues. And so we're not carrying the burden alone anymore.
Man, you're so great. I hear you, and I'm just oh my God. I don't even understand how you're able to
think about the sulky bitches for a moment. I have never been in a space that honest, that supportive, that I've never been in a space like that ever in my whole life. And in fact, in the beginning, I was like, oh, I'm just going to be exhausted. I can't deal with people, blah, blah, blah. And as I started interacting with the space, so many beautiful things have come of it. Just this blossoming of all of, it's like being in a garden every day. And it a couple of weeks ago, before I started with the whole book thing, me and my mom, she'd be like, so what happened with the sulky bitches today? Because it's every single day we are going through all types of mess, but we are loving each other. We're supporting each other. We're uplifting each other. And it's just a phenomenal, amazing moment. And it can't stop here. This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning, I would say, of a period of time where people understand the power of uniting. You'll see. So don't lose hope and don't be too tired. And if you're tired, go on vacation, girl. That's why you got to check. What's wrong with you?
Oh my God. Yeah. I haven't had vacations a lot. I get some hotel time.
Well, during your hotel, you invite me to come give you a massage.
Okay. I will try to
self-care.
Yeah. So I think we're out of time for the moderated. So we have some questions, and I forget his name. Blah 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 is going to come in and moderate questions.
So actually, the last question kind of dovetails nicely into this first one. Nicole is wondering how white feminism contributes to upholding racism and classism, and if you see that as a particularly American thing.
Well, white feminism, I don't think it would be particularly American, because there's Europe and there's countries all over the world with white women that are positioning themselves to fight for women's rights. I think with any group, with any demographic that are united on any front, there's going to be blinders, right, to issues, because how would you know? And white feminism has proven that over time. Like, there have been a ton of blinders to racism. There's been a ton of blinders even to certain types of classism, or to immigrant experiences, or dealing with issues with sexuality, with gender. With, we are in a different time, however, because guess what? Now there's no more excuses. You got Google, you got the internet. If people want to position themselves as advocates, which I'm sure so many white feminists want to do, they have to embrace that part of that advocacy is self-education. And I'm seeing that so much more now than I've ever seen it before. So while I could speak to the past and the white feminist, like I in my book, I discussed the situation with Patricia Arquette, kind of talking about classism instead of racism, when it's like, it was about the wage gap. She was wrong. But the point is, we're moving into a new time. And I'm really grateful for that moment. And because of that, I try my best to reinforce what we need to move forward, which is self-education, and like I said, like unity.
Great. And Jessica would love to hear your reflections on the benefits and or challenges of raising and educating your children in the Caribbean. Do you wish you had been raised in the Caribbean longer?
It's so funny. That's a question that I always think about. Like, what would my life have been like if I stayed there, if I went to school there, blah, blah, blah. And it's such a great question. And it's an ever evolving answer as I get to experience it through having my kids in those systems, and B, as I reflect more and more on my own experiences in the Caribbean. So the biggest thing that you notice right away is that all the kids look like your kids. And that's a really beautiful, amazing experience. And, all the kids have their little uniforms and their hair with the bows on it. And, it's a very, the education system in the Caribbean is really informed by England and by much of the English education systems. With that said, that should give you an idea of some of the pitfalls. It is not unique to the United States of America to whitewash the crap out of history, just so we're clear. That happens globally. White supremacy is a global issue. And you see that happen in the Caribbean. Like, you see a lot of the same types of hierarchies in how we teach history, how we teach language, how we teach all of these things. So it's a strange balance. But the point that I really want to reinforce here is, I feel like moving forward, so much of education, coming back to that tech thing, we are in a new era. Like, tech gives us the opportunity to expose our kids to anything we want. My daughter takes so many online classes, and it's phenomenal. And if we expand education to include things like gymnastics and things like golf and all of these other swimming, these are things that I couldn't afford for my kids here, and I can afford for them there. So it's like finding that balance between utilizing tech to the best of my abilities.
Oh, you might have frozen.
Why? Am I back?
Oh, you're back.
Yeah, so it's complicated, but suffice it to say that there's beauty and there's hardship, and so much of the hardship can be mitigated by using those online resources, folks.
Great. And Asherson W. says, hello and congratulations for writing this book. As an African American who lived in New York, then Texas and Colorado in the 70s, and back to New York, I would like to know, how does living in those states compare individually in versus Trinidad? I reside in Long Island, New York, which is very segregated and a liberal state. Would you live in the U.S. today? Do you have more negative or positive thoughts about your life in the U.S.?
Well, I would say every single one of these questions is definitely 2000% covered in the book. So buy the book, click on the link. It's right there. You get all those answers spelled out very clearly. I do a lot to give the reader a really clear understanding of the difference between the states and, of course, the difference in my experience in Trinidad. So suffice it to say, that's something that you can really get to fully experience by engaging in the book and in the audiobook anyway. So thanks for that question.
And Bess asks, speaking of exhaustion and recharging, what has writing and publishing this book been like for you?
Oh, Lord of mercy. No, writing was a
spotlight.
fantastic experience. I loved every second of writing my book until the end. I was like, when is it gonna come out? For like 8 months. That was it. You know, aside from that, I had a fantastic editor. I have a fantastic team. My agent always holds me down. I have great mentors who hold me down and always give me the right advice. Even when I think I know everything, they're like, wait a minute. So writing it was really both affirming and humbling and everything at the same time. 8 months of angst. Yeah, Kern. Oh, the last part I want to say about the book and writing the book and the whole process of the book was the fight to get the most amazing cover ever by Kern. Bruce is in the chat. Hold it down. Let me show y'all. He did this artwork. Look at this. Look at this beautiful artwork. Y'all should definitely check him out. Google him. He has a website. He does amazing portraits. Hold down Black artists, because that's what it's all about. But yeah, it writing this book and the experience of getting it published was one of the most phenomenal experiences of my life to date.
And for our final question, Nicole asks, have you ever experienced someone being an accomplice with you as opposed to just an ally? And what did that person do?
Oh, no. Let's talk about accomplices. Like when I'm getting ready to burn the family court down and I gather all my sulky bitches and we're going to go like a mob. But yeah. Allies, it's true. You know what? I'm going to say allies are amazing, and accomplices, I guess the difference is action-based. Well, one of the most clear examples of an accomplice is Stephanie being here right now doing this event with me. We were connected just through a writing group, and she showed up, she held it down, her questions were on point. So she's my accomplice tonight in successfully executing this event. She's phenomenal. Thank you so much for coming, and I love you all so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I have been on the other side of this so many times, but I've never been the person asking the questions. So I was really nervous.
You did a fantastic job. You asked so many great questions, and it was so in depth and so amazing. I'm so excited.
I don't need to feel good. You should.
You should feel good.
You are the amazing writer, and you
hold
did
hold the crown.
Oh, you need the crown in this moment, girl. It's just such a good book. It's already sparked conversations within my family, and my 7-year-old and I had a conversation about it today, and so it's been great. I'm so thankful for your work, and I'm so thankful for your friendship, and you are absolutely amazing. Thank you for asking me. I don't mean to make it about me in this moment, but
yes, accomplices, sulky bitches in the crew holding it down. I see y'all in the chat.
We do have a few of them in the chat.
Guys, thank you so much, Tiffanie and Stephanie, and to everyone who tuned in this evening. We really appreciate everyone's time. If you haven't yet already, please click that link below to purchase a copy of Black American Refugee. And if you'd like updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast or subscribe to our newsletter. So that's it for tonight. Thanks, guys, and have a wonderful and safe evening.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you for coming. It's so good to see you, Tiffanie.